number 19 Ole Miss, number 3 in the CFP Georgia. This game had massive implications for the SEC standings, who has the best path to the playoffs of the SEC, and what it means collectively for the other conferences in terms of how many teams they might get in. It might not look like it now, but for our deep cuts college football people, they know this was a very important game. And, Hunter, we were talking about some of the scenarios now that we know that Ole Miss won this game. And let's hop right into it.
Yeah, we're in a tough spot here now because if you're looking at the SEC rankings, there's so many teams that are trying to get into the SEC championship game. You have 3 one-loss teams in Tennessee, A&M, and Texas. Texas A&M and Texas will play later this year. Tennessee has to play Georgia next week. But now you have Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Missouri, LSU, all 2 losses in conference. So there's just this wide range now of teams that could make it. Whereas before, had Georgia taken care of business, the way that this would shake out is a little bit different. You'd likely see the winner of the Georgia-Tennessee game play the winner of the Texas A&M game for the SEC championship.
Yep.
Now there's all kind of scenarios. I was working them all out with like different ways, and there's ways for anybody to get in. So Georgia now doesn't control their destiny. Actually, the result of this, the only team that really controls it is A&M in Texas.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Tennessee as well. They have opportunities to get in. So A&M kind of was the winner of this game as well. Yeah,
definitely big for A&M, and for Georgia and for Ole Miss. The work is still in front of them, right? For Ole Miss, you got to win out, and you probably still need some things to happen to not necessarily to get to the SEC. You need some things to happen to get the SEC championship. You might still need some things to happen to be that 3rd or 4th team to get in the playoffs. I say 3rd because we're assuming the SEC championship loser will probably get in as the 2nd highest ranked team for the SEC. But that 3rd and 4th spot's still kind of open right now.
Yeah, and I was talking, debating over the weekend with some people about this. Is it better to not play in the SEC championship game? For some of these teams, because the SEC, like ACC, will have 1-loss teams playing likely in their championship game. The SEC might have 2-loss teams playing. One of them is going to lose. Do you put a 3-loss team that played in over, you know what I mean? Like everyone else was sitting at home. So what do you do here? So there's some people are like, oh, it's almost better to use that as a bye week. I don't know. I think you play to win the game, the SEC championship game, lock up that bye.
I think you want to lock up that bye. I don't think you can penalize a team for playing an extra game.
Yeah.
To me, that's not fair.
If you're sitting on the fringe, right? Like if you are a Texas A&M team, or you're likely like a Georgia team, right? Like Georgia in these new rankings is probably going to be hovering right around 10. If they win out, they'll probably be at like 8, right? Yeah. Like if they beat Tennessee, they'll still be 2-loss. They might be like 7 or 8. If they play in the SEC championship game, they become 3 losses and they lose to like a Texas or something. It could put an interesting spot where like, okay, yeah, they played, but they're 3 losses.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah. It'd be their 3rd loss in the conference championship. So meaning like they probably lost to an A&M, or they lost to a Texas in that game. And at that point you split the series. It's kind of like, okay, well, you beat Texas, but then Texas beat you. Both teams kind of have to get in. It definitely makes an intriguing scenario when it comes to the Georgia Ole Miss game and what it means for the conference. Bringing it from a key takeaway perspective from this game, and we'll get back to the playoff talk and we'll get back to the standings, but that was the most, to me, the most earth-shattering thing when it comes to the impact of this game. What do you feel like were some of the key takeaways for Ole Miss when it comes to this game and what it means going forward?
I think in college football, injuries are such a big piece of it, and it turns a game completely around. Florida, Georgia, the quarterback comes out, the entire vibe of the game changes. Ole Miss is a team that is right now, to me, the biggest takeaway is they're just deep in available talent. Losing a player does not change anything for this Ole Miss team.
Yeah.
No Dart, here's Simmons. No Harris,
here's
Watkins goes off. Parrish didn't play. You got Ulysses Bentley the 4th. I mean, playing well. So like you have guys that can step up and play at any given time. Makes it tough on defenses when you could plan to shut down wide receiver 1, you bring in 2, you bring in 3, and they all can touch the ball. So to me, I think that's the biggest takeaway offensively, right? And then on the defense, they're just a killer from a pressure standpoint. they are one of the best teams in the country at getting to the quarterback. They had 4 sacks on this game, strip sack. They forced a fumble off Frazier. The defense is killer. And then if you pair that with the offense, they are one of the most complete teams on both sides of the ball.
Definitely. And you had talked about it earlier and the stock up, stock down, and just some of our football talk earlier. When this team is firing on all cylinders, they're a very tough team to stop. And, every team's all cylinders is different. Ole Miss's all cylinders is a top 10 team, that can take out some really good teams. Right. And we've talked about how good we think Georgia is and compared to how they've looked this season. This was just a dominating win over I think a good Georgia team. And you talked about what this offense can do with Ulis running the ball and some of the other players, even Jackson Dart, 8 carries, 50 yards, like he's getting involved in the rushing game as well. I think this is one of the higher totals for him this season with designed runs. And so that kind of keeps these defenses honest when it comes to loading the box versus, playing for pass protection or for pass coverage. And so for me, that was one of the key takeaways from this game, particularly when it comes to Ole Miss.
Yeah, and I didn't look at the stats. I don't have them, but one of the things that they had done so good to start this year, and you're talking about it with having to stack the boxes, they were so good at the play action. That's how they were getting guys open downfield. It's true. I mean, you got the running back, you got the quarterback where he can take off and run. So now you're leaving guys in one-on-one coverage with an extremely talented receiving core. So if they're firing, they're great. They weren't necessarily there against Kentucky. They had an unfortunate loss to LSU where the defense just wasn't keeping up on it from the DB standpoint. So this is a team that's really close to having been an undefeated team at this point.
It's a wacky season because they dominated South Carolina too. And we've seen the South Carolina defense give a lot of teams fits, and it was weird. Like they lost to Kentucky and they dominated South Carolina, and the offense has always looked pretty good most of the season. But this game, doing it against Georgia, like I was talking to my friends, I always felt like for Georgia on the other side, you look at the SEC, it was always, oh yeah, Tennessee's good, but no, they're playing Georgia. They got this, right? You remember the Hendon Hooker year? Of course, you remember it. But for Georgia, like they Tennessee comes in number 1 in the country. They dominate them at Sanford Stadium. They play Ole Miss. They played them last year or 2 years ago. They come in, they dominate Ole Miss. It's like they're never actually worried about those top tier teams in the SEC unless they're Alabama. In this season, we've seen the top tier teams give them games. We've seen teams that have top tier prestige but are not top tier teams. Florida, Kentucky give them games. It's key takeaways from this game is that Georgia is who we thought they were. Outside the Texas game, we've seen a lot of the same type of football all season to me.
Yeah. The defense, we said it earlier, the defense is what's going to win this team games. They might not be firing at all times, but that was what was so dominant in the Texas game was the defense was just they were getting turnovers. They were forcing Texas to punt often. The offense was getting so many attempts at it. But right now, if the offense isn't getting a lot of tries at it, they're not scoring. The offense is kind of limited because of multiple factors, right? Like the running game is not solid. It's like 1.8 yards per carry on the day.
Yeah.
The O-line play wasn't good.
The Frazier fumble was huge too.
Bad.
For them.
Real bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the receiving core is not great. You got 2 guys who were talented that are out now with legal issues. In Georgia.
That's not even funny, but it is.
I mean, it sucks, but it is like, a lot of times you see this and it's like, oh, we next man up. But this is 2 receivers from a receiving core right now that is not doing the quarterback any favors. They're dropping some passes. I saw, the official stat.
Like top 10 in the nation in drops, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And it doesn't help when you have a quarterback who's turning the ball over often. If he does hit his guy in the hands and he drops it, it's like, you can't do anything right. But they're limited behind that. Receiving core, bad quarterback play. I mentioned it. He leads the country in interceptions. So they're not at a good spot offensively. And if the defense doesn't do what they need to do, then what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. If the defense isn't doing what they need to do, this is a middle of the pack SEC team. If the defense is doing what they need to do and the offense is just like competent, they can take out most opponents. I mean, you saw it even in the Bama game, right? They're able to come back in the second half when the offense is competent. The problem is the offense is turning the ball over every single game. Yeah, and we saw it again here, and unfortunately, just the magic ran out. I keep saying it, but unfortunately, it just ran out for this game. And when you play a good opponent, like Ole Miss, it's kind of like what we said in the Florida segment last week about them. I was like, this works now, but when you play a good team, this could be challenging, and we saw it against Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think at this point, if you win out, you're in. If you're Georgia, I don't think there's an opportunity for you to not be in. It's very unlikely. Like it would have to rely on like a weird G5 team coming in and taking your spot. But like I think if you beat Tennessee, you jump up. I think that we'll see like a Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, like 9, 10,
Texas.
11.
Yeah.
8, 9, 10 kind of in that ranking. Texas 3. So then you'll get those 4 teams. Texas A&M will be right up there too. They didn't play this week. They had them at 14 last week. So it'll be interesting to see where they put them. So, you're going to have Boise State in that middle spot. So this could be a year where one of these teams gets their spot taken by a Boise State or an Army.
You're talking about in terms of having like the G5 will get the home game, and one of the SEC teams will still get in, but they might have a road game. If I'm following you,
maybe. I mean more like one of these teams could easily sit at the end of the year at 12.
Yeah,
I can see it. It would be unfortunate if like a team were to swoop in, like a Boise State that wins.
Yeah.
Boise State's earning it right now, but they're kind of sitting right on that fringe 12 team. I do think that a 2-loss Georgia team deserves to be in the playoff more than a 1-loss Boise State team. I think most people would see that and say that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm on the same page with you there. I do think we've talked about it. It's for Georgia. They have the most tests. They've failed 2 of them. They've passed 1 of them. They have 1 more test to pass. The 2 they've failed, Bama, Ole Miss. The 1 they've passed, Texas, the biggest test, the most weighted test right now. Texas is carrying the weight for their resume, and then they got Tennessee this week. Tennessee, to me, is probably the 3rd best test out of those 4. Even though they beat Bama, I still think Bama's better than Tennessee, but that's another discussion for another day. They passed those 4 tests. You're 2-2 in your tests. More tests than any team in the SEC from a scheduling perspective, in my opinion. I don't know how you leave that team out. I don't think they get a favorable seed. I don't know how you leave them out, though.
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, and they played Clemson. So I think like Georgia deserves the spot more than a group of 5 team that comes in.
Yes.
But I think we could see just with some weird stuff here, like if Miami loses to SMU, right? Like in the ACC championship.
Yep.
I think they both get in. Like I mean, you have the ACC winner, but if you have a Miami team that was 1 loss going into that, so that's 2 teams.
Yeah. So it's going to be SMU potentially, and then Miami gets 2 spots. You look at the Big 12, it could be Colorado and BYU both getting spots, or I think Iowa State's kind of knocked out now with that loss, but we can talk about that around the country. But for the sake of Georgia, you're in a spot right now where you're looking at other teams to figure out if you're going to get in. Like that's not a spot you're normally in.
No,
it's just it's weird to see.
Yeah. So I mean, they got some things coming up. Tennessee next week. They're opening as 10.5-point favorites in that game. We're going to do a preview and break that down too. So a lot to look at for that game. But in this one right now, it wasn't pretty. Do I think it's who this team is? I think they're closer to this than they are to what they did in Texas. I think what the team is normally is closer to this. I think that they will bounce back. They have good coaching. I don't think that they'll dwell on this for a Tennessee game.
Yeah, and look, playing on the road in the SEC is hard. They made it look easy against Texas. It looked pretty hard against Ole Miss. I think they'll bounce back. I think Georgia will be okay. Their ceiling is significantly lower than years past, but the ceiling at its highest is still a championship contending team. It might not look good, but it's a championship contending